Welcome back, Rosebuds, for another volume of Ghost Tales to Tell in the Dark. Today we have 3 stories for you. If you're new to our channel, welcome. All of our stories feature some kind of paranormal or ghost encounter, and the stories are either based on truth or complete fiction. You can decide as you listen, but make sure to listen all the way to the end, where I will reveal truth or fiction. Eatonville Ghost Train by Basil Bailey. I was hiking with a group of friends down to Mashel Falls yesterday. We took the route from the bridge, down across the train tracks to the trail. There's this part where you have to walk on the slippery, mossy train tracks across the river down below. Super stand by me moment. We made it down to the falls and had a blast. But on our way back, we crossed over the tracks and stopped before climbing back up to the road so we could fasten our dog's leash. My friend is on the tracks fastening up the good old boy when we hear what we assume is a loud truck on the bridge above us. It was so loud that we couldn't hear each other talking anymore. My other friend felt the train rails start to shake and he said, "Wow, feels like a train is coming." And then we heard it. A train whistle. No, not a car horn, not the acoustics from the nearby tunnel. An actual, honest-to-God train whistle. The good boy is still getting fastened on the tracks when I say, "Oh my God, Chloe, you gotta get off the tracks." The whistle blew even closer from right around the bend, only just out of our sight. I scream at them, "Chloe, get off the tracks!" And she rushes off of them at what seems like the last possible second, but no train came by. Nothing at all. It was completely silent. We all pause and look at each other for a while in disbelief about what just happened. "You all heard that too, right? Am I crazy?" "Felt it too," one of them said. I apologized to Chloe for screaming at her, but she told me she was grateful despite nothing happening. Either we all 3 had the same auditory hallucination, or something unexplainable just happened. We all checked our maps for nearby trains, but there were none for miles. And this one was close. None of us have any possible explanation as to what happened, other than it must have been a ghost train. Possible Skinwalker Encounter by Kyle Longstar. For you to understand this story, I need to give you a little setup first. I lived most of my childhood days in northern Arizona. In that part of the country exists the legend, or possibly reality, of the Skinwalker. If you aren't familiar with the Skinwalker, they are terrifying. Pray you never cross paths with one. A skinwalker is considered a Navajo witch. In their culture, witches are evil. When their medicine men and women learn to become healers, they have to learn both good and evil practices. The purpose of this is so that one can recognize evil to avoid evil. There are some who are rumored to go the way of the dark side, and when they do, they can morph into a skinwalker. I was in the Boy Scouts when I was a wee lad, way back in the day, and it was time to go to summer camp. My mother, much to my chagrin, donated my dad's old army tent again. This thing was a beast unto itself. Did I mention how much I hated this tent that managed to make it to scout camp every year? I digress. My mother was one of those women who liked everything in its place. It's important you know this because we meticulously cleaned everything before and after each use, especially things that would be stored all year, such as the fake Christmas tree, the summer pop-up pool, and the ugly green canvas army tent. There was almost a ritual to cleaning this thing when we put it away at the end of camp. We had to flatten it out and sweep every last fleck of dust from it, then fold it into thirds, then roll it. After it was swept, it was sacrilegious to step on it. Otherwise, Mom would make you do it all again. I know these may seem like impertinent details, but they really aren't. You'll understand why later on in my story. At camp, Dad was helping me set up our tent per the normal routine. There wasn't anything out of the ordinary. Due to my mother's cleaning and organizing idiosyncrasies, the tent was pristine. Well, as pristine as an old army tent could be. About 3 nights into camp, there are 5 of us in the tent, and we're up way later than we should have been telling ghost stories. Suddenly, one of my campmates, we'll call him John, says, "Hey, did you guys hear that?" Then, as if on cue, we all become quiet and the distant howl of a coyote sounds off in the distance. We all stare at each other. Then it echoes again, sounding closer. Our eyes are bugging out as we all get prickles on our skin. It's quiet, and I know this is going to sound cliche, but too quiet. Then, all of a sudden, we hear a loud smack sound as if an adult had taken the palm of their hand and smacked the top of the tent. At this point, we're about to soil ourselves. We settle down into our sleeping bags. Storytelling time was over. None of us dared to speak again. As we lay there, the normal night sounds resumed. Now, I can't speak for my tent mates, but at first, I was completely spooked. But then, I figured it was just one of the adults trying to scare us into being quiet. I eventually fell asleep. The next morning, we talked about it in hushed tones over breakfast. In the light of the day, our fears seemed silly. We all brushed it off, and were in agreement that one of the leaders had slapped the roof of our tent. Although I did have a random thought that the tent was taller than most of the adults. I was wondering how one of the leaders was able to smack the middle of the top where the noise had been made. Probably just used a stick or something. I dismissed the whole incident for the remainder of camp and thought nothing of it. After that, none of us gave it much thought. That was until it was time to break down camp. My mom, as usual, had driven in for the teardown and pack-up. Like a drill sergeant, she was there directing the troops with organized precision for maximum efficiency. Before I get to the next part, you should know that the ground in northern Arizona is mostly dust and pine needles on the forest floor due to it being high desert terrain. After getting the poles down on our tent, all 5 of us boys stood there in terrified silence as we saw what was on the top of the tent. On the highest and centermost portion of the tent was a large human footprint. It was huge, like a man's size 13. We all stood there just gawking at it, not wanting to touch the tent. We were all thinking about that evening with the coyote howl getting even closer, the eerie silence, then the smacking sound on the tent. My dad came over and was likely wondering what had the power to silence a group of 5 9-year-old boys. He took one look at the footprint, and I swear my dad's face turned the whitest shade of white I'd ever seen. He also just stared at it until my mother came over. She looked at it and told us to get back to sweeping. None of us wanted to sweep the footprint dust away, but I knew if I didn't, my mother might see it next year and have an unholy cow in front of everyone and embarrass the hell out of me. So I took it upon myself to sweep it away. For some reason, I thought it would be difficult to remove, like maybe it was burned into the canvas. Surprisingly, that was not the case. My fellow scouts and I did discuss it later, and we all agreed that we'd probably just narrowly missed an encounter with a real live skinwalker. So, dear friends who love camping, if you happen to find yourself pitching your tent on the high desert plains near Flagstaff, Arizona, be cautious, because you just never know what might be lurking in the dark. The Steel Hill Hotel in New Hampshire by Jason 1968. My boyfriend's sister invited us to visit New Hampshire with her to see her son's family who lived there at the time. My grandmother was in hospice at the time, so I couldn't go. But since I was the whiz at finding airfare and accommodations online, I was tasked with finding a place to stay near Franklin, New Hampshire, where 3 adults could stay for a week without breaking the bank. To my surprise and delight, I found a large multi-bedroom cottage with living room area, fold-out couch, and kitchenette for an extremely reasonable weekly rate. When the time came to go, my boyfriend and his family flew off early in the morning for their 1-week stay. I was missing him a great deal because it was the first time we'd been apart since we started living together 5 years prior. I was expecting a call that evening to let me know they'd arrived. After about 10 p.m., a message popped up on my voicemail. No ring, and it was from Frank's telephone number. I listened to the message, and it was only 30 seconds of static. No background voices or noise like one would expect from a pocket dial. I deleted the message, wish I hadn't, and went back to sleep. The next day, I got another phone call from Frank, and he excitedly opened the call by saying, "You're never gonna believe this." I automatically thought, oh no, the hotel room must have been a scam or a timeshare hostage situation because it was so friggin' cheap. It had to be too good to be true. Nope, those were not his next words. He said, "We just found out that this hotel is famous for being haunted." He started to tell me a story about how odd it was that when they checked into the hotel, they were taken to their little cottage on the hill, and none of the staff would get closer than about 8 feet from the door of the room. No one came in, and they just left their luggage outside. Okay, strange, but maybe they do things differently in New Hampshire? Throughout their stay, they kept hearing doors slam, but they were the only ones staying in that part of the hotel. The next day, 2 housekeeping staff came in to give them towels and to clean. The 2 women stayed together and silently hurried through their tasks as fast as they could, not wasting any time getting out of the cottage. By this time, everyone was getting the feeling that something was a bit off. The family started to talk about it amongst themselves, and then the 6-year-old just casually mentioned that while they were sleeping on the living room pull-out couch, a man walked through the living room. He was wearing a red shirt and didn't say anything, but he whistled a tune and then walked out through a different door than he'd entered. Since she was only 6, it was pointless asking what tune he was whistling or what era his clothes looked like they came from. Frank then told me that his sister's husband, who had also stayed home, had received a phone call from their daughter-in-law in Franklin, New Hampshire, the day before, but no one was on the line when he answered. She had never called him before, so he thought that was strange, and he immediately called Frank's sister to tell her about it. That's when I told Frank that his phone had also dialed me the night before, and he responded, "That's impossible. We were all asleep by then, and my phone was on the bedside table." I wished that I had kept that message with the 30 seconds of static so that he could have heard it too. Anyway, the group got a little suspicious about all the strange happenings and had Googled the name of the hotel and the words ghost or haunted, and sure enough, they found out that Steel Hill had many cases reported. Most were similar to theirs of doors slamming and a man walking around whistling. The man whistling and the doors slamming can be explained away pretty easily, but why were the staff so jittery and hesitant to be in that particular cottage? And how on earth did the phone calls occur by themselves? We plan to return there someday, just me and the BF, so that I can see the hotel and experience these things myself. After all, the hotel is stunningly beautiful, and the air is cool and clean. Aside from a little ghost infestation, everyone had a wonderful time. I hope you enjoyed those stories. In a moment, I'm going to reveal truth or fiction. First, do you have a ghost story that you've lived or created from imagination? We'd love for you to share it with us. We're going to be running a story contest very soon where you can win up to $100 or some lesser prizes for our runners-up, get featured on our channel, podcast, and in our anthology. You can go to blackrosereads.com and we will send you an email when submissions open up. Also, if you'd like to support us as small content creators, check out our exclusive products on blackrosepress.art. If you see anything you like there, it really helps us out so we can continue to make content for you. As a writer, I love journals and notebooks, so as a side hobby, I love to create my own. We have several creepy cover designs over there that I think you might enjoy. There will be a link in the description down below for our special merch, journals, and the story contest. All right, on to the reveal of truth or fiction. Story number 1, Eatonville Ghost Train by Basil Bailey was a true story. I loved this story, and thank you so much for allowing me to read your story, Basil Bailey. Story number 2, Possible Skinwalker Encounter by Kyle Longstar was also a true story. This was actually written by a close personal friend of mine, so thank you, Kyle, for sharing this. I never tire of hearing this creepy tale. Which brings us to story number 3, Steel Hill Hotel in New Hampshire by J. Sand 1968. I chose to read this story because I now reside in New England, and while I've never been to the Steel Hill Hotel in New Hampshire, there are more than a fair share of haunted places here in New England. This story was based on truth. Normally, we mix up the truth and fiction stories, but on occasion we won't. That way you're always left guessing. I hope you enjoyed those. If you did and you're on YouTube, don't forget to give this video a thumbs up. And if you're on the podcast, hey, share it with a friend. That's a wrap. Until next time, take care and stay creepy.